The cold was a hook in her fingers. Maeve Callahan worked the awl through the thick saddle leather, her knuckles white and raw. The sinew followed, tough and waxy, pulling the torn flank strap back together. Each pull sent a sharp ache up her arm, a pain that started in her bones and ended in her teeth. It was November in the Colorado mountains, 1873. Winter did not knock. It kicked the door down. Her world was a tent, 9 feet by 7, made of canvas patched with flour sacks and hope. It smelled of wood smoke, old grease, and the carbolic soap she used to wash away the grime. The tent stood apart from the main camp, downwind, tucked into a fold of granite and pine. The camp itself, a muddy scar of tents and raw-cut cabins clinging to the mountainside, was named Last Hope, which Maeve always thought was a cruel joke. It was a place where hope came to die. The miners who dug in the frozen earth treated her like a stray dog. They paid her in beans, a strip of jerky, or, when they were flush, a thin silver dime to mend their clothes. But they never met her eyes. The few women in camp, who sold whiskey and rented their bodies in the back of the pick and shovel saloon, looked right through her. Maeve was something else entirely. She was the camp's shadow, the woman who mended the tears in their canvas and their denim while they tore fresh rents in her name. The whispers followed her when she went to the creek for water. Fallen girl, unclean, the one the missionaries brought. They said she was touched by ruin, that she had a past that good folk should shun. Maeve let them whisper. Shame was a heavier burden than a body, and she had learned to carry both. She had been carrying them since she was 16, since the mission wagons sold her as a bride to a man whose name she had buried deep in her memory. She had escaped him, but she had not escaped the brand he left on her. Surviving was her only creed. The mending was honest work. Her needle was a small, sharp truth in a world of lies. She finished the last stitch on the saddle, her fingers too numb to feel the needle. She was rubbing her hands together, blowing her breath into the cup of her palms, when the world went silent. The wind died, the distant ring of a pickaxe stopped, and the snow began. It did not drift down. It fell straight and thick, a white curtain dropping on the world. Maeve felt a knot tighten in her stomach. A heavy snow meant the hunters would stay in. It meant the supply wagons would not come. It meant deep, biting hunger. She grabbed her thin coat and stepped outside. The air was sharp, stealing her breath. She had to check her snares by the riverbed, her only hope for meat. She pulled her hat low and leaned into the sudden, rising wind, forcing her way through the thickening drifts toward the creek. The world was gray and white. The pines were ghosts. The only sound was the crunch of her own worn boots and the rising howl of the storm. She found the snares empty, the wire circles sagging under the weight of the snow. A cold despair settled on her. She turned back, head down, when she saw it. A shape, a darkness against the white, nestled in the frozen reeds by the riverbank. It was not a deer. It was too big. She approached slowly, her hand going to the skinning knife on her belt. It was a man. He was face down, half in the icy sludge of the water, a dark stain spreading beneath him on the snow. He wore a cowboy's duster, not a miner's canvas. Maeve knelt, her knees sinking into the wet. She rolled him over. He was young, maybe 25. His face was pale, smeared with mud, and shadowed by a rough beard. A line of blood trickled from his hairline, but the real trouble was his shirt. It was soaked crimson on his right side. He was breathing, a shallow, wet rattle. She looked around. No one, just the storm, wrapping them in isolation. Her first thought was to run. A wounded man meant trouble. It meant guns. It meant men like the one she had fled. But he was dying. She put her hand on his chest to feel for a heartbeat, and her fingers brushed something stiff in his boot. A piece of paper, folded and tucked. She pulled it free. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, the snow melting on the ink. Wanted. The word was big and black. Below it, a name, Eli Calder, and a number, $500. Murder. Maeve's breath caught. $500. It was not a sum of money. It was a different life. It was a train ticket east, away from the mountains, away from the whispers. It was a room in a boarding house in a city like Boston or Philadelphia. A small shop, perhaps, with a sign that just said, Seamstress. It was freedom. She looked from the paper to the man. He was dead weight. All she had to do was walk back to camp, find the sheriff, and tell him. Or, easier still, just walk away. The snow would do the rest. The snow would hide him. And in the spring, she could find him in the poster. She stared at his face, looking for the killer. She had seen killers. Their eyes were flat, like shale. Their mouths were mean. This man, his eyes were closed. His mouth was parted. His lips blue with cold. He moaned, a low sound of pure misery. His eyes flickered open. They were hazel, shot with gray, and filled with a terror so deep it looked like a hole in his soul. He was not looking at her. He was looking past her, at something only he could see. He was not a wolf. He was a rabbit in a trap. Maeve recognized that look. She saw it every morning in the cracked piece of mirror she kept in her tent. "Damn you," she whispered. She did not know if she was talking to him or to God. She jammed the wanted poster back into his boot. She could not take the money. She could not send another hunted thing to its cage. Getting him to the tent was the worst work of her life. He was tall and built solid, all bone and muscle. "You're a lot bigger than I thought," she grunted, the words ripped away by the wind. He was half conscious, his legs dragging, his weight a dead anchor. She hooked her arms under his, wrapped his arm over her shoulder, and hauled. It was only 100 yards, but it felt like a mile. She slipped, fell to her knees, got up. Her lungs burned. The snow was up to her shins now. Blinding. She dragged him, step by agonizing step, fueled by a stubbornness that had kept her alive this long. She finally fell through the flap of her tent, pulling him in after her. He collapsed onto her narrow cot, soaking the blankets. For a long moment, Maeve just lay on the frozen dirt floor, gasping for air, her heart hammering. The canvas walls snapped and drummed in the wind. The small tent, her only sanctuary, suddenly felt crowded, violated. He was a problem, a $500 problem. She got to her feet, her body shaking. He was shivering, a violent, rattling quake that shook the small cot. If he died here, she would have to drag him back out. If he lived. She lit her small lantern. His face was gray. "You are not dying in my bed," she said aloud. She hesitated. This was the line. She could still throw him out. But the sound of the wind was a scream. Leaving him out there now was the same as murder. With a sigh that felt like it tore something loose in her chest, she went to her small stove. She stoked the embers, added precious pieces of split pine, and put a kettle of snow on to melt. She turned back to him. His duster was frozen stiff. She had to fight the buckles with numb fingers. She pulled it off, then stared at his shirt. It was stuck to him with frozen blood. "Turn over," she ordered. He did not respond. Maeve grabbed his shoulder and roughly rolled him onto his stomach. He groaned. She took her skinning knife, the one she'd almost used on him, and carefully sliced the wet shirt up his back. She peeled the fabric away from his skin. The wound was on his right side, just under the ribs, a ragged hole. A bullet, she guessed. It looked clean, maybe passed through, but it was raw and cold. She worked in silence. She washed the wound with hot water and carbolic, her touch rough but efficient. He hissed when the soap bit, but he did not cry out. She took her mending kit, the same one she'd used on the saddle, threaded her strongest needle with clean sinew, and started to sew his skin back together. She worked without thinking, her mind focused on the small, precise movements. The needle went in, the skin resisted, the thread pulled tight. It was just mending, fixing something that was torn. When she was done, she wrapped his torso with a clean strip of flour sack. She found a dry shirt in her small trunk, one a miner had paid her with, and wrestled him into it. She covered him with her blankets. He was quiet, his eyes closed. She did not know if he was asleep or unconscious. Maeve sat on her stool by the fire, her entire body aching. The tent was suffocatingly small. There was her stove, her stool, her trunk, and the cot. And now, him. He took up all the space, all the air. He smelled of pine, cold sweat, and blood. The tension was a living thing. She was trapped. He woke hours later. The blizzard was a white rage outside, the canvas howling, the lantern cast flickering shadows. His eyes found her instantly. He tried to sit up, then gasped and fell back, clutching his side. "Stay still," Maeve said. Her voice was flat. "You're shot." "Where?" His voice was a dry rasp. "My tent, outside the Last Hope camp. You collapsed by the river." He stared at her, his hazel eyes wide and sharp. He was taking her in, the worn dress, the calloused hands, the deep exhaustion in her face. He was a cornered animal, calculating. "Who are you?" he asked. "Maeve Callahan. I mend things." She gestured to the saddle in the corner. "Now, I want your word. You will stay quiet. You will not make trouble. The men in that camp, they won't ask questions before they shoot a second time, especially if they know there's a bounty." His eyes flashed. "You saw the poster." "I did. $500. He whispered. "Why am I not in the sheriff's office?" "I don't rightly know," Maeve said, turning back to the fire. "Maybe I'm a fool. Maybe I didn't want to drag you that far." He watched her. She could feel his gaze on her back, like a weight. "I don't have any money," he said. "I didn't ask for any." "They're lying," he said, his voice suddenly stronger. "Men usually are," she replied, not looking at him. "I didn't murder anyone." Maeve finally turned. She looked at his face, clean now, and saw what she had missed in the snow. He was handsome, not in a soft town way, but in a rough-cut, sun-scorched way. His jaw was strong, his nose straight. It was a face that could cause trouble, and knew it. He was dangerous, just as she'd feared. "Save your story," she said. "It doesn't matter to me." "It matters," he insisted, wincing as he pushed himself up on one elbow. "I was working for the railroad. A foreman, an enforcer. He was whipping a boy, a little boy, no more than 10, who worked the water line. He was going to kill him. I just pushed him. I shoved him hard, away from the child." He stopped, his breath catching. He fell bad. His gun went off. Or maybe someone else shot. I don't know, but he died. And they all pointed at me. The enforcer was the company's man. I was just a cowboy. They said I shot him in the back. They put my name on that paper, and I ran. Maeve stared into the small fire. It was a good story. Plausible. It was the kind of story a guilty man would invent. It was also the kind of story that happened every day in the West. Justice was a rich man's game. "I don't care," she said, her voice hard. "You are a danger. You brought your danger to my door. You will stay here until the storm passes, and then you will leave. Understood?" He held her gaze, his own hardening. "Understood." He complied. He lay on the cot, watching her. Maeve tried to ignore him. She organized her sewing kit. She patched a tear in her own blanket. She made a thin broth from jerky scraps. But his presence filled the tent. Every time she moved, she was aware of him. When she brushed past the cot, her skirt touched his hand. She flinched as if burned. The blizzard trapped them for a day, and then a second. The world shrank to the 9x7 space. The wind never stopped. They barely spoke. Maeve gave him broth. which he drank. She checked the bandage. The bleeding had stopped. She tried to remain cold. She had built a wall around herself, brick by brick, shame by shame. This man, with his hunted eyes and his handsome face, was a threat to that wall. He was trouble, the kind of trouble that had ruined her. On the second night, the fever took him. He started shivering again, but this time it was not from cold. His face flushed. He mumbled. Turning his head on the small pillow, Maeve felt his forehead. He was burning. The wound, it was infected. She spent hours boiling water, cleaning the stitches again, forcing sips of cool water between his lips. He tossed and turned, his long limbs tangling in the blankets. Sometime after midnight, in the deepest dark, he grew quiet. Maeve sagged against her stool, her eyes heavy. She must have dozed. She woke to a grip on her wrist. It was not a gentle touch. It was iron. His eyes were wide open, staring at her, but he was not seeing her. He was seeing the ghosts. "I'm sorry," he breathed, his voice broken. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean, forgive me, please." He was not talking about the murder. His voice was filled with a different, deeper agony. It was a plea for his very soul. Maeve tried to pull her hand away. "Let go, you're dreaming." "Please," he begged, his grip tightening. Don't let them, forgive me." Something in her chest cracked. It was the sound of a wall, tended for years, giving way. He was not a man asking for pardon. He was a child lost in the dark. She had been that child. She was that child. She stopped pulling, slowly. Her own trembling fingers uncurled and hesitantly rested on his. "Hush," she whispered, her voice thick. "Hush now. It's all right." He did not let go. His breathing just hitched, and he fell back into the fevered sleep, his hand still locked on her wrist. Maeve sat there, trapped by his grip, her heart pounding a strange, painful rhythm. She was still sitting that way an hour later when a new sound cut through the blizzard. Shouting, men's voices rough and close. Maeve's blood went cold. She ripped her hand free from his, startling him awake. "What is it?" he whispered, his eyes clear now, sharp with fear. "Get down!" she hissed. A smear of orange light moved against the canvas wall. Torchlight. "Check the tents!" a man yelled. "Even the whores! Check 'em all!" Maeve's heart stopped. She looked at Eli. He was trying to sit up, looking for a gun he did not have. "They'll find him!" Another voice, closer. "He can't have gone far in this." Maeve moved. She did not think. She acted. She grabbed the kettle and doused the tiny flame in her stove, plunging the tent into near-total darkness, leaving only the faint red glow of the embers. "Get off the cot," she ordered. "I can't." "Get off!" She grabbed the blankets and threw them to the dirt floor. She kicked snow in from the tent flap, covering the glowing embers, killing the last of the light. The tent was now pitch black and freezing. "They're coming!" Eli whispered, his voice shaking. The torchlight was bright on the canvas now, just feet away. "Lie down, on the floor. Don't move. Don't breathe." She shoved him, and he fell to the blankets. There was no time. The flap was going to open. Maeve dropped to the floor and lay down beside him, pulling her own ragged coat and the remaining saddle leather over both of them. It was a desperate, foolish hope. She was pressed against him, his body radiating a dangerous heat. She could feel the rise and fall of his chest, smell the fever on his breath. They were breathing the same small pocket of cold, dark air. The tent flap ripped open. Light and snow flooded the space. Maeve could see the shadow of a man holding a torch high. "Nothing in here," a voice grumbled. "Just the seamstress's junk. And it stinks." Maeve Callahan lay perfectly still in the dark, her cheek pressed against the shoulder of a wanted man, and held her breath. The shadow of the man with the torch lingered on the canvas wall long after the light was gone. Maeve and Eli lay frozen on the dirt floor, pressed together in a tangle of blankets and stiff leather. She could feel the rapid, frantic beat of his heart against her ribs. Or perhaps it was her own. "He's gone," a voice yelled, distant and muffled by the snow. "Nothing but wind and ice up here. Let's get back to the saloon." The voices faded. The only sound that returned was the wind, screaming as if insulted by the interruption. Neither of them moved. They lay in the frigid dark, breathing the same pocket of air. His body, solid and hot with fever, was a shocking presence against her. It had been years since she had been this close to a man, this close to anyone. Her instinct was to scramble away, to put the stove and the stool and the saddle between them. But she stayed. She stayed until the last echo of the men's voices was swallowed by the storm. Finally, Eli let out a long, shuddering breath. It warmed her cheek. "They're gone," he whispered. His voice was rough. Maeve pulled herself away, the movement stiff and awkward. She crawled on her hands and knees to the stove and, with trembling fingers, used the flint to spark a new flame on the tinder. The small light felt like a miracle, pushing the shadows back into the corners. She did not look at him. She felt exposed. He had seen her terror. She had hidden him. They were bound now by a secret that was as cold and dangerous as the bullet she had dug out of him. "You should sleep," she said, her voice flat, betraying nothing. She shoveled a handful of snow into the kettle and set it on the fire. Eli pulled himself back onto the narrow cot. He watched her, his eyes dark in the lantern light. He did not say thank you. He did not need to. The silence in the tent was thick with it. Days passed, or perhaps it was one long, unending night, broken by brief moments of gray, watery light. The blizzard did not relent. It worsened. The wind became a physical thing, a giant hand pressing against the canvas, trying to flatten their small world. The snow piled up, sealing the tent flap, covering the ventilation hole at the peak. The air grew thick and close, smelling of smoke, fever, and unwashed bodies. They rationed what they had. Their world shrank to the fundamentals of survival. Mornings, Maeve would melt snow. They would share a handful of dried beans, boiled until soft, eaten directly from the pot with the same spoon. She would eat, then hand it to him. He would eat and hand it back. It was a strange, silent communion. In the afternoons, they would chew on a small strip of jerky, working the tough, salty meat until their jaws ached. The cold was a constant enemy. Maeve kept the stove barely alive, feeding it slivers of pine, one at a time. The woodpile, stacked neatly in the corner, dwindled with alarming speed. Eli's fever broke on the third day. He woke up clear-eyed, his skin cool, but the weakness left him shaky. The wound, she saw when she changed the flour sack bandage, was healing. Her stitches were ugly, but they were holding. With the fever gone, the silence began to weigh on him. He was not a man built for confinement. He needed sky. He needed wind he could ride through, not hide from. He shivered, though not from fever. It was a deep, restless chill. "I'm from Oklahoma," he said one afternoon, his voice startling in the quiet. He was staring at the canvas roof, where the snow pressed down, making it sag. "Or what they call Indian territory, mostly. My PA raised horses, good ones." Maeve kept her hands busy, restitching a tear in her own coat. She nodded, to show she was listening. "I've been breaking horses since I was 12, he continued, his voice low. "There's nothing like it. That moment when they finally stop fighting you. When they just give in, and it's just you and the horse, and all that land. You can run for 100 miles and see nothing but grass." He pushed himself up on one elbow, his face tight with a sudden anger. "I ain't used to this. Hiding like a rat in a hole. It ain't right." "Being alive is right," Maeve said, her voice sharp. Being dead is easy. You want easy? He looked at her, his hazel eyes flashing. No, I ain't the man on that poster. I ain't a killer, and I ain't a rat. I know what you are, she said, tying off the thread with a sharp pull. You're a rock, and I've got to haul you out of the river. You're heavy, so be quiet and get well. Her words were meant to sting, to push him back, but he just watched her. Why? He asked. Why what? Why are you doing this? You saw the poster. $500. That's more money than I've ever seen. You could be warm. You could leave this place. Maeve stopped her work. She looked down at her hands. They were cracked and stained, the nails broken. Why had she saved him? The question had sat in the corner of the tent since she'd dragged him in. I told you, she said. I don't rightly know. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She snapped. She felt a flush of anger. You think you're the only one who's hiding? You think you're the only one with a name people whisper? She stood up, needing to move. She paced the 2 steps from the stove to the trunk, then turned. You talk about your open sky. You know what I had? I came west with a church mission, a wagon full of women and preachers, come to save the souls of the heathens and the miners. They talked about grace. They talked about God's plan. Her voice was low, but it vibrated with a cold fury. We got to a camp, not unlike this one, maybe worse. They ran out of money for Bibles. But the miners had gold, and they wanted wives. They wanted women. Eli was silent. He just watched her, his face grim. They told us it was our duty, Maeve whispered, the shame of it washing over her, fresh as the day it happened. To bring civility, to build families. They handed me over to a man named Silas. I was 16. I was not asked. I was given like a piece of a livestock, all in exchange for a donation to the church's good work. She wrapped her arms around herself. So, you see, Mr. Calder, I don't have much faith in good men, or God's plan, or the law. What happened to him? Eli asked, his voice quiet. This Silas. He was a violent man. His hands were heavy, and his whiskey bottle was always empty. One night, he hit me. He hit me one too many times. He fell down drunk. I took his coat, what was left of my strength, and I walked out. I walked for 2 days in the snow. I nearly died. I found this camp, and I've been here ever since, alone. They were discarded, both of them. He was an outcast of the law. She was an outcast of society. He was hunted for a crime he said he did not commit. She was punished for a crime that had been committed against her. She waited for him to look away, to show the disgust that all the others did. The miners, the saloon women, the preachers. They all looked at her like she was spoiled meat. But Eli did not look away. His gaze was steady. We ain't rats, Maeve, he said, his voice soft. We're just survivors. The words settled between them. Survivors. It was a hard, ugly word, but it was true. The storm howled, as if trying to remind them of its power. Maeve sat back down on her stool. The tent was quiet again, but the silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of their shared confessions. She did not know why, but she felt she owed him the rest of it, the part she had never spoken aloud to anyone. That miner, he had a temper, she said, her voice barely audible. She stared into the small fire. He had a temper, and a heavy boot. I was carrying for a time, but I lost it. After that, there was nothing left to stay for. Eli closed his eyes. He did not say, I'm sorry. He did not offer pity. He just absorbed the truth of it, the black, hard weight of it, and held it with her. That was more than anyone had ever done. She lay awake that night, long after his breathing had evened out into sleep. She lay on her thin pallet of furs, just feet from his cot. She watched him. The lantern was turned down low. casting shadows across his face. He was handsome, yes, but it was more than that. It was the strength in the line of his jaw, even in sleep. It was the weariness around his eyes. He was a good man. She could see it. He tried to stop a man from hurting a child, and the world had branded him a killer for it. Her hands, resting by her side, ached. They ached with a strange, unfamiliar longing. Not just to touch him, but to soothe him, to smooth the worry from his forehead, to feel the warmth of his skin. A warmth that was not born of fever. She was so cold. She had been cold for years. She turned away, squeezing her eyes shut. He was a danger. He was a weakness. He was a dream she could not afford. He would heal, and he would leave, and she would be here, mending clothes, with the whispers for company. The blizzard reached its peak on the 5th day. It came with a sound she had never heard, a low, tearing groan that seemed to come from the mountains themselves. Then, a sharp crack, like a rifle shot, echoed inside the tent. A gust of wind hit the canvas, the seam she had mended just days before, near the peak, ripped open. It did not tear, it exploded. A blast of wind and ice and snow burst into the tent. The lantern flame was ripped out, plunging them into a screaming, chaotic darkness. The stovepipe rattled. Sparks and embers flew from the stove, scattering across the floor. "Maeve!" Eli yelled. "The stove!" she screamed, crawling on her hands and knees. The tent was trying to fly away. The canvas walls flapped with the sound of thunder. Snow was everywhere, a blinding, freezing whirlwind. Maeve found an ember burning a hole in her blanket. She beat it out with her bare hands, crying out as the heat seared her palm. Eli was at the breach, fighting the torn canvas, trying to hold the two edges together. He was on his feet, but the wind was too strong. It threw him back. I can't hold it," he yelled over the din. "The rope!" she cried, grabbing her mending trunk. "There's rope!" She found it, a coil of thin, strong cord. She tossed it to him in the dark. "Together!" She scrambled to his side. The cold was unbelievable, a physical blow that stole their breath. The snow was knee-deep inside the tent in seconds. They fought the canvas. He was strong, but his wound made him clumsy. He grunted with pain. Maeve used her good hand, her all, her teeth. She punched new holes in the frozen canvas while he held the flap, his muscles shaking. They threaded the rope, lashing the tent back together, their fingers numb and useless. It took an hour of shouting and cursing and freezing. When it was done, they collapsed. The tent was holding, but the damage was severe. The stove was nearly out, choked by snow. Their blankets, their food, everything was wet and freezing. And "The stove," Maeve whispered, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. They cleared the snow. Eli used the last of his strength to split the final log from the woodpile. Maeve coaxed the embers back to life. But it was a losing battle. The cold had gotten in. The tent was no longer a shelter. It was a trap. They huddled by the weak fire, wrapped in the one quilt that was mostly dry. It was not enough. You're trembling," Eli said. His own voice was thick. "So are you," she replied. "My coat," he said. "Take it. It's dry on the inside." He had been wearing his duster. "No, you'll die. Your wound. We'll both die if we sit here like this," he said. He was right. She shook her head, unable to move. Eli sighed. He did not offer the coat again. Instead, he simply moved. He sat behind her, on her stool, and pulled her back against his chest, wrapping the quilt around both of them. Maeve went rigid. "Don't be still, Maeve," he commanded, his voice quiet but firm. This is just for warmth. We'll share. It's the only way." She wanted to fight. She wanted to claw her way free. This was the one thing she could not allow. But the cold was winning. His body, even weakened, was a furnace behind her. His chest was solid. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling the quilt tight. She was pressed against him, her head tucked under his chin. She could feel his heart, a slow, steady drum against her back. Slowly, agonizingly, her muscles unknotted. The shaking did not stop, but it lessened. She let herself steal his warmth, just once, just for survival. They sat like that for hours, in the dark, while the storm tried to tear them apart. Later, when the wind had quieted to a low moan, the fire was a bed of pale red embers. The tent was dark. Maeve had not slept. She was too aware of the man holding her. "I need to check the bandage," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "It's fine. I need to check." He loosened his grip, and she turned in his arms, facing him. There was barely a foot of space between them. She reached for the lantern, but he stopped her hand. "Don't," he said. "The light. Let's just save the oil." She understood. In the dark, they were just two shapes. In the light, they would be a man and a woman, and the shame would come back. She nodded. Her hands, guided by memory, moved to his shirt. She fumbled with the buttons, her fingers still numb. She pulled the fabric aside. She needed to feel the stitches, to see if he had torn them in the fight with the storm. Her cold fingers brushed his bare skin. He inhaled sharply, but did not move. Her hand was small against his chest. She felt the hard plane of his muscle, the ridge of his ribs. She found the wound, the raised, rough line of her own sinew stitches. It was dry. It was holding. She let her palm rest flat against him. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and slow, beneath her hand. He was solid. He was real. "You're a lot bigger than I thought," she muttered, the words escaping her before she could stop them. It was true. In the snow, he had been a body. In the cot, a patient. But here, holding the storm at bay, he was vast. She felt more than heard. His laugh. It was not a laugh. Really, it was a soft puff of air, a low rumble in his chest that vibrated through her hand. It was the first sound of lightness, of life, that had been in the tent. "I reckon I am," he whispered. Her hand was still on his chest. She should have pulled it away. She should have turned back around, but she did not. He moved his own hand, covering hers. His skin was rough, calloused from reins and ropes, but his touch was gentle. He did not grab, he just held her hand, pressing it against his heart. She looked up. She could not see his eyes, only the shadow of his face. Closer than it should be. The air was thick. The silence was absolute. He leaned in. She knew she should stop him. She knew this was a mistake. This was the beginning of the end, but she was so tired of being alone. His lips touched hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was clumsy and desperate and real. It tasted of jerky and fever and the metallic tang of fear. It was a kiss of two people who had forgotten what it felt like to be alive. She did not respond. She just endured. And then, as quickly as it started, he stopped. He pulled back, breathing hard. He rested his forehead against hers. "Maeve," he rasped, his voice full of a pain she recognized. "I can't, I won't be like him. I won't be another man who takes..." She understood. He was respecting her. He was being good. And it terrified her. Goodness was a lie. Goodness was the missionaries who sold her. Goodness was the law that wanted to hang him. He was pulling away. He was going to leave. She reached up, her hand shaking, and grabbed the front of his shirt. "You don't have to be good," she whispered, her voice cracking. The confession tore out of her. I don't care about good. Just stay. Please, just stay." He did not answer. He did not move. He just stayed there, his forehead pressed to hers, breathing her air. his hand still covering hers on his chest. He just stayed. They stayed like that, foreheads touched, hands linked over his heart, until the gray light of morning seeped through the mended canvas. The world, for a few hours, had been reduced to the space of a breath between them. But the world outside was patient. It always waited to reclaim its due. The storm broke on the 7th day. It did not end, but it lessened. The wind screamed, dulling to a bitter, whining moan. The snow stopped. An exhausted, bruised silence fell over the mountains, revealing a landscape that was pure, white, and deadly. "The wood is gone," Maeve said, her voice flat. She was staring at the small pile of splinters and bark in the corner. "And the jerky—" "I know," Eli said. He was sitting on the edge of the cot, testing his weight. His side was a deep, angry purple, but the stitches held. He was weak, but the fever was gone, and his eyes were clear. "I can set your snares, maybe find a deer." "You cannot," she said, her voice sharp. "They'll see you. The whole camp will be out, digging out, checking traps." "We can't starve, Maeve." "We can be careful. I will go." "You will not," he said, and the authority in his voice was sudden and final. He stood, slowly, holding onto the tent pole. "You saved my life. I will not be the man who lets you starve for it." Before she could argue, a new sound came from the camp. Not shouting, laughter, a rough, loud guffaw from the direction of the Pick and Shovel saloon. The camp was alive again. Maeve felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. She cracked the tent flap. Miners were moving, their dark figures struggling through the massive drifts. Shovels in hand, one of them, a man named Silas, whose overalls she had mended a dozen times, was heading down the slope, passing near her tent. He saw her peering out and stopped, his face split by a grin that showed his broken, stained teeth. "Mornin', Maeve," he called out, his voice carrying easily on the cold air. He was a man who enjoyed bad news. "You best keep that needle sharp. Gonna be money in this camp soon." Maeve just stared at him, her face impassive. "Yep," he said, leaning on his shovel. "A bounty hunter rode in. Made it through the pass just as the storm was closing. Man named Rigg. Says he's been tracking a killer. Says he knows right where the vermin is holed up. $500. He says, gonna tear this camp apart looking for him." The blood drained from Maeve's face. Rigg. Even the name sounded like something hard and cold. "He's over at the saloon now, talking to the sheriff. Says he'll start the hunt proper as soon as the paths are clear." Silas chuckled. "Hope you ain't been hiding no one, girl." He laughed again and trudged on, leaving his words hanging in the air like poison. Maeve let the flap fall. She turned to Eli. He had heard. His face was granite. "Get your coat," she said. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely function. She went to her trunk, dug under her spare clothes, and pulled out the last piece of jerky. It was a hard, dry strip, barely enough for a child. She grabbed her skinning knife. "What are you doing?" Eli asked. "I am saving your life. Again." She shoved the jerky and the knife into his hands. "Go, now. Head north, up the ridge. Stay in the deep timber. Don't stop until you're over the pass. They won't look for you that high. Not at first. Not in this snow." He looked at the jerky. Then he looked at her. He set the food and the knife on the cot. "No!" "What do you mean, no?" she cried, her voice rising to a frantic whisper. "He's here. A bounty hunter. He knows you're here." "He's guessing," Eli said, his voice calm. "He tracked me to this range. And the storm hit. He knows I'm trapped. This is the only camp for 50 miles. He's just fishing." "I will not let you be fished." She was pushing him now, shoving his chest with her small, hard fists. "Go, damn you! Eli, go! I dragged you in here. I will not be the reason they hang you." "And what about you?" he said, catching her wrists. His grip was gentle, but strong as iron. "What happens when this rig comes here? What happens when he asks you where I am? What happens when Silas tells him you live alone, apart from the others? He'll come here first. I will lie. I've been lying my whole life. I can lie to him. And when he doesn't believe you? Eli's eyes were boring into hers. When he looks at you, a woman alone, and decides to make you tell the truth? No, I won't have that. I won't run and leave you to face him. You will, she screamed. The terror, the exhaustion, the years of solitude and fear. It all broke at once. The wall she had built around her heart did not just crack, it shattered. You have to go. I cannot lose this. I cannot lose you. I cannot lose anyone else. She was sobbing. Great, tearing sobs that ripped up from her soul. She beat against his chest, her strength gone. I lost everything. I lost my name. I lost my home. I lost my child. I will not. Watch them drag you away. I will not. I would rather die. She collapsed against him, her fight gone, replaced by a grief so profound it shook her entire body. Eli's arms, the ones that had held her for warmth, came around her. He held her. He just held her as she wept, his hand stroking her hair, his chin resting on top of her head. He let her break. He let all the poison and the pain pour out of her. And he did not flinch. He just held on, an anchor in the storm that was raging inside her. Shh, he whispered, his own voice thick. Shh, Maeve, I'm here. I'm right here. I'm not going. They stood there for a long time, the world outside forgotten. She cried until she was empty, until there was nothing left but a hollow ache in the solid, living warmth of the man holding her. I lost my brother, he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She went still, listening. I was 17, he said, staring at the canvas wall, seeing something else. His name was Thomas. He was 12. We were burning brush on the south pasture. Pa told us to watch the wind. But we were boys. We were wrestling, playing. The wind shifted. It was so fast. His arms tightened around her. It jumped the creek. It got into the dry grass. And it ran straight for the barn. Thomas, he ran inside. His pony was in there. A little pinto he loved more than anything. He ran in to save him. Maeve could feel him trembling. I ran in after him. But the smoke, it was so thick, I couldn't see. I was so scared. I could hear him screaming. And then I couldn't. I got out, but he didn't. I left him. I ran out, and I left him in the fire. Eli, she whispered, her heart breaking for him. I still dream about it, he said, his voice raw. I dream I'm dragging him out. I dream I'm holding him, but I always wake up, and my hands are empty. He took a shuddering breath. When I saw that enforcer hurting that boy, I saw Thomas, I saw him, and I couldn't let it happen again. I couldn't fail again. And now I'm here. He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His eyes were haunted, but his gaze was true. I am not leaving you. Maeve, I am not running. I'm tired of running from things I can't change. We will face this together. She looked at him, at his confession, at the shared, broken pieces of their lives lying on the tent floor. He was not a hero. He was not a killer. He was just a man, haunted by fire, as she was haunted by shame. He was human, and so was she. She did not know who moved first. It was not a kiss. It was a falling. They fell into each other, a quiet, messy tangle of humanity. It was a desperate clinging, a press of foreheads, a clutching of hands. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and she buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of him, smoke, pine, and a faint, clean smell of soap. It was not about desire. It was about survival. It was the desperate, unspoken need of two souls, adrift and alone, to finally touch shore, to hold on to something solid and real in a world that had tried to erase them. They stood in the middle of the small, cold tent and simply held each other. And for a few moments, the world and its hunters did not exist. A heavy boot scraping snow outside the tent flap tore them apart. They sprang back, their faces masks of sudden panic. "In here!" a man's voice barked. The flap was ripped open. Maeve stumbled back, her hand flying to her throat. Eli moved instinctively in front of her, his body a shield, his hands empty but clenched into fists. Two men filled the opening. The first was the camp sheriff, a man named Harlan, who wore a perpetually worried look and a tarnished badge. The second man was the Storm. He was tall, broader than Eli, and wrapped in a thick buffalo coat that made him look like a bear. He had a face like a slab of raw meat, scarred by frost and violence. A heavy pistol was strapped to his hip. His eyes, small and black and intelligent, moved past Eli, past the empty cot, and settled on Maeve. "This is her," Sheriff Harlan said, his voice nervous. "This is Maeve Callahan. She does the mending." The big man, Rig, stepped into the tent. He did not ask. He just entered, forcing them back. He ducked his head under the low roof, his presence sucking all the air and warmth from the small space. His gaze swept the interior, noting the single cot, the empty woodpile, the paltry bag of beans. "Who's this?" Rig asked, his voice a low gravel. He nodded at Eli. "He's a cousin," Maeve stammered, her heart hammering. "He was caught in the storm, on his way to Leadville. He's sick." Rig looked Eli up and down. He saw the weakness, but he also saw the strength. He saw the way Eli stood. Protective. "Cousin, huh?" He took a step, circling Eli, and his eyes fell on the cot. He saw the single blanket. He saw the two spoons in the one pot by the stove. His lips twisted into a cruel, knowing smile. "Right," Rig said. He turned his full attention to Maeve. He walked right up to her, invading her space, forcing her to tilt her head back to look at him. He was close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "You live out here all alone, little bird," he purred. "Must get lonely." I manage," Maeve said, her voice trembling but cold. "I'm sure you do." Rig's eyes roamed over her face, her hair, her dress. "I'm looking for a man, a killer, name of Eli Calder. Seen him?" "No," Maeve said. "I've seen no one, just my cousin." "Your cousin," Rig repeated. He reached out and, before she could flinch, grabbed a lock of her hair, rubbing it between his thumb and forefinger. "Thing is, I know about girls like you. Girls who live on the edge of things. Girls with a past. I heard stories about you, about the mission wagon." Maeve went rigid. Eli took a step. "Get your hands off her!" Rig laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He let go of her hair. "Brave cousin. Thing is, girls with a past. They know how to keep secrets, but they also know the value of protection. A man like me could be a good friend to a girl like you, or a very bad enemy." He was not just threatening her. He was offering a trade. Her for Eli. The implication hung in the air, thick and foul. He knew. He did not know, but his instincts were sharp, and he was cornering her, using her shame as his weapon. The fear in Maeve was so cold it burned, but beneath it, something else was happening. The terror of the last week, the confession she had shared with Eli, the feel of his arms around her. It had burned something clean. She was tired of being afraid. She was tired of being unclean. Maeve looked him square in the eyes. Her hand moved so fast, no one saw it coming. She slapped him. The sound was a sharp crack, like ice breaking. It was not a hard slap. He was too big. She was too small, but it was precise, and it was pure defiance. Riggs' head snapped to the side. The smile vanished. His eyes went dead. "Get out," Maeve said, her voice shaking but full of iron. "I have not seen your man. I have nothing more to say. Get out of my tent." Sheriff Harlan looked horrified. "Now, Maeve." Riggs slowly turned his head back. A red mark was blooming on his cheek. He did not look at her. He looked at Eli. He looked at him with a cold, assessing hatred. "We'll see." Rigg whispered. He backed out of the tent. "Sheriff, we'll check the rest of the camp, but I'll be back. You can count on it." He was gone. Harlan gave Maeve a look of pure pity and then scrambled out after him. The tent was silent. Eli let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a minute. He turned to her. His face was pale, but his eyes were blazing. He was looking at her as if he had never truly seen her before. "Maeve Callahan," he breathed. "You are something else." "He'll be back," she said, her knees suddenly weak. She sank onto the stool. "He knows. He'll tear this place apart. He'll find you." "Then we'll have to make sure," Eli said, a strange, new light in his eyes, "that he finds something else first." That night, they moved. The camp was distracted. Rigg and the sheriff were turning over miners' tents, searching cabins, creating chaos. No one was watching the lone tent on the hill. "My PA, the one I ran from," Maeve whispered, her voice urgent as she dug in her trunk. He was a trapper. He left some things when I ran. I buried them." She pulled out a bundle of old, rotting clothes. A man's clothes, heavy canvas pants, a flannel shirt ripped to shreds. "What is that for?" Eli asked. "A body," Maeve said, her face grim. "He'll be back, Rigg. He'll search here again, and he won't be gentle. We have to give him a reason to stop looking." They worked in the freezing darkness, fueled by a desperate, shared cunning. They stuffed the old clothes with snow and rags, packing them tight, fashioning a crude, man-shaped dummy. It needs something," Eli said. He looked at his own side. "No," Maeve said instantly. "You'll bleed out. You're not healed." "I don't have to," he said. He took her skinning knife, went to the corner where she kept her snares, and looked at the one rabbit she had caught before the storm, frozen solid. He cut it, letting the dark, frozen blood thaw and drip onto the shirt of the dummy. He smeared it, rubbed it into the snow. "Now," he grunted, "we drag him." The work nearly killed them. The snow was deep, the dummy was heavy, and Eli was still weak. They hauled it 50 yards from the tent, down toward the ravine, making a heavy, dragging track in the snow. They made it look like a struggle, like a man, wounded, trying to crawl away. They half-buried the dummy in a snowdrift, leaving one boot and a bloody sleeve visible. It was a gruesome, desperate gamble. They stumbled back to the tent, collapsing onto the floor, covered in snow, gasping for breath. Their hands were raw. Eli was pale, his wound aching. Maeve looked at him, his hair matted with snow, his face strained with pain. He looked at her, her clothes torn, her face smudged with dirt. A choked sound came from her throat. It was not a sob. He looked at her, confused. And then she laughed. It was a wild, hysterical sound, bubbling up from her chest. It was the laugh of a person who had seen the bottom and had just spat in its eye. Eli stared at her for a second, his face a mask of disbelief. And then a slow grin spread across his face. A low chuckle started in his chest. They laughed. They sat on the dirt floor of her tiny, patched tent and laughed until tears streamed down their faces. They laughed at the absurdity of it. They laughed at Rigg. They laughed at the world. They were two broken, discarded people, and they had just pulled off the most ridiculous, most brilliant trick of their lives. Their bond was no longer just about survival or shared pain. It was forged now, in conspiracy and defiance, in laughter. The ruse worked. The next morning, a shout went up from the camp. Silas had found the body. Rig and the sheriff thundered down to the ravine. Maeve watched from her tent flap. She saw Rig kneel, saw him pull the dummy from the snow. She saw his fury. He kicked the dummy, scattering the stuffed rags. He knew he'd been fooled. He stormed back up to her tent, but this time, he did not enter. He stood outside, his face black with rage. "You're clever, girl," he yelled, his voice raw. "You and your cousin, but he's still here, and I'll find him. A man can't hide forever. A man's gotta eat." He was right. The bag of beans was empty. The rabbit was gone. The land was frozen. For 3 days, they starved. Eli grew thinner, the strength he had regained seeping away. Maeve's hands shook so badly she could not hold her needle. "I have to," Eli said, on the 4th day. The sun was out, a pale, cold disk in a white sky. "There'll be deer moving, looking for browse. I'm a good shot. I have to." "You don't have a gun," she whispered. "No," he said. He held up her skinning knife. "But I'm a good hunter, too." She begged him not to. She pleaded, but he was right. They would die. He slipped out of the tent at dusk, a ghost in the gray light, moving into the deep timber. He was gone for hours. Maeve sat by the cold stove, imagining a gunshot, a shout, the sound of men dragging him back. He returned just before dawn. He was empty-handed. He had seen nothing. He tried again the next day, and that was when it happened. He was high on the ridge, checking a game trail, when he saw the flicker of movement. It was not a deer. It was a man, a miner, walking the trap lines. Eli froze. He pressed himself against a pine, but the snow was deep, and he was exposed. The miner, a young man named Jonas, stopped. He saw him. Their eyes met across the white expanse. Eli did not run. He just stood there. The miner raised a hand, slowly, then turned and walked, almost ran back toward the camp. Eli came back to the tent. He did not have to say anything. Maeve saw his face. "He saw you," she breathed. "He saw me," Eli confirmed. He sat on the cot, his head in his hands. "It's over. The whole camp will know in an hour." "Flee," she begged, grabbing his arm. "Now, Eli, go. Run as fast as you can. You still have a chance. Go north, please." He looked up at her. His face was worn, tired, but the fear was gone. In its place was a deep, settled calm. "No," he said, his voice quiet. He was right. A man can't hide forever. He took her hand. "I'm tired of running. Maeve, I'm tired of being a ghost. I'm tired of being the man in the fire." "What are you saying?" she cried, her heart seizing. "They will hang you. Eli, they will form a mob. Rig will lead them." "Then they'll hang me," he said. "But they'll hang Eli Calder, not a rat in a hole. I'm done. I will not leave you here to face them alone. I'm staying." She stared at him, at the terrible finality in his eyes. He was not going to run. He was going to stay. He was choosing to stay, with her, and face whatever came. The shouting started an hour later. It was distant at first, from the saloon, but it was growing. A dark, ugly sound, the sound of a mob. Maeve closed the tent flap. She lit the lantern, though it was still day. The small light pushed back the shadows. She and Eli looked at each other in the small, enclosed space. There was nothing left to say. The world was coming. Maeve's hands were trembling, but not from cold. She walked to him, stood in front of him. He was sitting on the cot, waiting. "I don't want you to go," she whispered, her voice cracking. The tears were welling, but she would not let them fall. Not now. She reached out and touched his face, her rough fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He was real. He was here. He had stayed. "Just love me tonight," she said. It was not a plea. It was a demand. A demand for one night, 1 hour, 1 moment of grace before the end. Love me before they come. Eli looked up at her, his hazel eyes searching her face. He saw her fear, and her strength, and her desperate, breaking heart. He saw all of her, the shame and the scars, and he did not look away. He raised his hand and covered hers, pressing her palm against his cheek. He stood up, slowly, never breaking her gaze. He did not kiss her. Not yet. He just held her face between his rough, warm hands. He leaned his forehead against hers, just as he had done in the storm. "Maeve," he whispered, his voice full of an emotion she had no name for. He loved her. Slowly. He loved her with a tenderness that unraveled her. He loved her with a patience that respected her, that saw her, that cherished her. He loved her with his hands, and his eyes, and his words. He loved her fully, holding nothing back, as the shouts of the mob grew louder outside their small, canvas world. He gave her the one thing the world had always denied her. He gave her a moment of being whole. The moment they shared was a fragile, impossible thing. It was a single candle flame in a hurricane, a moment of warmth and pure, unshielded honesty in a life built on cold defenses. Maeve lay against Eli, her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. The world, for that one night, had been held at bay. She had not been a fallen girl. He had not been a wanted man. They had just been Maeve and Eli. But the morning always comes. It came not with the sun, which was a pale smear behind the gray clouds, but with a sound. It was not the wind, it was not the call of a bird. It was the sound of men. It was the low, angry rumble of a mob. Maeve was on her feet in an instant, pulling her dress on, her hands shaking. "Eli, they're here!" He was already moving, pulling on his boots, his face grim. The weakness from starvation and his wound was still on him, but his eyes were clear and hard. He stood, and for a second, he just looked at her, his gaze full of the night they had shared. He reached out, his rough thumb brushing her cheek. "Maeve." "There's no time," she whispered, her voice frantic. She went to the tent flap, pressing her ear to the canvas. The voices were closer now. They were coming from the saloon, moving through the camp, growing in number. It was Jonas. He had told them. "I heard Rig," a man shouted. "He's paying $20 gold to the man who puts the rope on him." $20. "Where is he?" another voice roared. "He's in that whore's tent. We all know it. Let's burn him out." "No." That was Rig's voice, a gravelly boom that cut through the others. "He's mine. The judge will want a body. We'll take him alive, and then we'll see." Maeve's blood ran cold. They were not just a mob. They were an organized hunt. She turned, her heart a cold stone of panic. "Eli, the back! Go out the back! Run! Go north, like I said! I'll hold them! I'll tell them!" She stopped. The tent was empty. The cot was empty. The quilt she had wrapped him in was folded, a small, square gesture of what? Of goodbye. "Eli," she whispered, her voice a thin thread. She looked at the tent flap. It was tied shut, from the inside. He had not run. He had not abandoned her. A new, colder terror seized her. If he had not run, if he was not here, then he had gone to meet them. He had said he was tired of running. He had gone to turn himself in. "No," she breathed. "No, no, you fool! You brave, stupid fool!" She ripped the tent flap open and ran. She did not grab her coat. She did not feel the snow, cold and wet, soaking her thin stockings. She ran, stumbling through the deep drifts. past the silent, staring miners who were not part of the mob but were too afraid to stop it. "Eli!" she screamed. Where would he go? Not the sheriff's office. Harlan was bought, not the saloon. That was Riggs' den. The church. He was a man who, despite it all, still believed in something. He had talked about the boy, about doing right. He would go to the one place in camp that stood for justice, however hollow, the small, raw pine chapel on the hill, where Preacher Davies held his Sunday sermons. She scrambled up the slick, muddy path. The main mob was still in the center of camp, organizing, drinking, but she could see a smaller group ahead. She saw Riggs' broad, buffalo-coated back. She saw Sheriff Harlan, and she saw Eli. They were not in the church. They were behind it, by the small vestry door. Eli was standing straight, his hands at his sides. He was not fighting. "I'm Eli Calder," she heard him say, his voice clear and carrying on the cold air. "I'm not a murderer. I'm turning myself in. I want a trial, a fair trial." Riggs laughed, a short, ugly bark. "A fair trial, huh?" Maeve watched, hidden behind the corner of the building, her hand over her mouth to stifle her own sobs. "Well, Cowboy," Riggs said, "court's in session." He hit Eli. He did not use his gun. He used his fist, a blow so fast and brutal it sounded like an axe splitting wood. Eli's head snapped back, and he staggered, but he did not fall. "I said, I want a trial," Eli panted, spitting blood onto the snow. "This is the trial," Riggs said. He looked at Sheriff Harlan. Harlan was studying a patch of ice on the ground, his face pale and disinterested. On a nearby crate, Maeve saw it, a small stack of gold coins, shining in the gray light. Harlan's payment. Riggs turned back to Eli, and he began to beat him. It was not a fight. It was a destruction. Riggs was a bear, and Eli was a man weakened by a bullet and starvation. Riggs hit him in the stomach, doubling him over. He hit him in the face, breaking his nose. He hit the side of his head, sending him to his knees. "This," Riggs grunted, "is for making me look like a fool. For that, dummy." He kicked Eli in the ribs, right where the wound was. Eli screamed, a high, thin sound of agony that tore Maeve's world apart. "And this," Riggs whispered, hauling Eli up by his hair, "is for your cousin." He delivered one last, terrible blow. Eli collapsed. He did not move. Maeve was paralyzed. She was frozen in that childhood place of terror, watching the heavy-handed man, watching the violence she could not stop. She was 16 again, helpless. "All right," Harlan said, finally looking up, his voice bored. "That's enough. Riggs, the judge will want him alive. Or mostly." "He's alive," Riggs said, wiping his bloody knuckles on his coat. He nudged Eli's limp body with his boot. "Just cooperative. Get the keys. Let's throw him in the stone hut." They dragged him through the snow like a carcass, his heels leaving two dark trails in the white. They hauled him to the small, windowless stone shed that served as the town's jail, unlocked the heavy wooden door, and threw him inside. The door slammed shut. The bar fell. The mob was cheering. Riggs raised his hands, accepting their praise. "He's taken. The killer is taken. We'll give him to the judge tomorrow, and then we'll see him hang." Maeve slid to the ground, her back against the cold church wall, and was sick in the snow. She stayed there, shivering, for a long time. The world was over. He had stayed. He had stayed for her, and she had watched them break him. The church bell began to ring. Ding, dong, ding, dong. It was Sunday. The preacher was calling his flock. The sound was obscene. She watched as the good people of Last Hope, the ones who had not joined the mob, began to walk past her. The miners' wives, in their one good bonnet, the shopkeeper, the saloon girls, their faces scrubbed, trying to look pious. They walked past the spot where Eli's blood stained the snow. They walked past the stone hut where he lay. They walked into the church to pray. A coldness settled over Maeve. It was a coldness so deep it burned. It burned away the tears. It burned away the fear. It burned away, finally, the last of her shame. She knew Rig. She had not realized it until he had stood in her tent, his smell of whiskey and stale sweat filling the small space. He was older. His face was scarred. But it was him, the man who had called himself a guide, the man who had preached on the wagon, his Bible in one hand, while his other... He was the man who had sold her. He was the man who had held her down and told her to be a good girl for Silas, that it was God's will. He was the root of her shame, the architect of her ruin, and he was here, being celebrated as a hero, while Eli, who had shown her nothing but kindness, lay broken in a stone hut. The hypocrisy of it, the screaming, terrible, unbearable hypocrisy. She stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she walked. She did not walk to her tent. She did not walk to the jail. She walked to the front doors of the church. She heard Preacher Davies's voice inside, his tone rising and falling. "And so we must cast out the sin among us. We must be vigilant. We must cleanse our hearts and our town of the darkness that..." Maeve threw the doors open. They crashed against the interior walls. The sound was a thunderclap. The preacher stopped, his mouth open. Every head in the church, 50, 60 people, the entire respectable population of Last Hope, swiveled. They saw her, Maeve Callahan, the fallen girl. Her hair was wild, loose and matted with snow. Her dress was torn at the hem and stained. There was a streak of mud on her cheek. She was a vision from the wilderness, a prophet of rage. "Woman!" Preacher Davies thundered, his face flushing crimson. "This is the house of God. You will not. This is a sacrilege." "Sacrilege?" Maeve's voice was not a shout. It was a low, raw cry that filled the sudden, dead silence. "You dare to speak of sacrilege?" She walked down the central aisle. The people shrank from her, pulling their skirts away as if she were a leper. "You talk of sin," she said, her voice growing stronger with every step. "You talk of cleansing this town." She stopped, halfway to the altar, and turned, her eyes sweeping over all of them. "You want to cast out the darkness? Then look at it." She pointed. Her finger was trembling, but it was steady. She pointed at Rig, who was sitting in the back pew, looking smug. Then she pointed at Sheriff Harlan, who was standing by the door, trying to look official. "You celebrate that man," she said, her voice ringing with a truth that was as cold and hard as the mountains. "You call him a hero. You call him a man of justice." Rig stood up slowly, a cold smile on his face. "The girl is upset. Her cousin has been arrested. She's hysterical." "He is not my cousin," Maeve said, her voice clear. "He is Eli Calder, and he is a better man than anyone in this room. He is a man who saved a child, and he is a man who saved me." A cruel laugh came from the pews. "Saved you? From what, girl? From loneliness?" Maeve ignored him. She looked at Rig. You all whisper about me. You call me unclean. You call me fallen. You see my shame, but you do not see the man who caused it." She locked her eyes on Rig. "I came west, 16 years old, with a mission wagon. We were told we were coming to serve God. This man, this Mr. Rig, he was our guide, our protector. He was the one who read the Bible to us by the fire at night." The church was so quiet, Maeve could hear the snow melting and dripping from the roof. "And when the money ran out," she continued, her voice breaking, but not with weakness, with fury. "When the donations dried up, he found a new way to serve God. He sold us. He sold me to Silas, the miner. He sold me for 2 bags of gold and a new rifle." Gasps. A woman's hand flew to her mouth. Rig's smile was gone. His face was a mask of pure, white-hot murder. "She's lying! The girl is mad!" "He told me it was God's will," Maeve screamed, the sound tearing from her. "He held me down. He told me to be quiet. He is the devil you preach about, and he is sitting in your church." The town recoiled. This was not a simple arrest. This was something dark and old and ugly. This was their shame. Not just hers. Some mocked, their voices nervous. "Lies! She's mad!" But others were silent. They were looking at Rigg. They were looking at his scarred face, at the pistol on his hip. They were looking at Sheriff Harlan, who was suddenly sweating, though the church was freezing. Then, a new voice. She's not lying. Not about all of it." A woman stood up. Mrs. Albright, a widow who ran the town's only boarding house. A stern, gray-haired woman who had never given Maeve the time of day. She walked down the aisle and stood next to Maeve. She did not look at her. She looked at the crowd. "I remember Silas," Mrs. Albright said, her voice firm. "I remember this girl when she first came. I remember the bruises. I remember her hiding. I did nothing. I was afraid. I am ashamed." She turned, and in front of the entire town, she took Maeve's small, trembling, raw hand in her own. And about the cowboy, another man stood. It was Jonas, the young miner. He was pale, shaking. I was there, on the railroad line. I saw it." "What did you see, boy?" Sheriff Harlan barked. "I saw the enforcer," Jonas stammered, twisting his cap in his hands. He was whipping the water boy. The kid was screaming. I heard him. We all did. The cowboy. Calder. He did try to stop it. He pushed him. The enforcer fell. His gun went off. It was an accident. But the enforcer was the company's man. We were all scared. We let them blame Calder. I'm sorry." The church exploded. It was chaos. Men were shouting, standing on the pews. Some were yelling at Rigg. Some were yelling at Harlan, calling for his badge. "Silence!" The voice was new. It was not Preacher Davies. A man stood in the doorway. A man no one had seen. He was older, in a black, dusty suit, his face lined with weariness and authority. He carried a heavy, leather-bound book. "My name is Ephraim Pace," he said, his voice booming over the chaos. "I am the circuit judge for this territory, and I have arrived, it seems, just in time." He walked down the aisle, his gaze taking in everyone. He looked at Maeve, still holding Mrs. Albright's hand. He looked at Rigg, his face dark. He looked at Jonas, who was shaking. "This," the judge said, "is not a church. It is a pigsty. And this is not justice. It is a lynch mob. Sheriff Harlan, you are relieved of your duties until I can sort this. You too." He pointed at Jonas and another miner. "Go to the jail. Bring the prisoner here. Mr. Rigg, you will stay. You will sit. And you, daughter," he said to Maeve, his voice softening just a fraction, "you will tell me everything, from the beginning." The hearing was held right there. The sun had set, and the church was lit by lanterns. It was cold. Eli was brought in. Maeve's heart broke. He was a ruin. His face was a swollen, purple mask. One eye was completely closed. He could not stand straight. He sat on the front bench, guarded, his head bowed. Maeve was called. She stood before the judge, the whole town watching. She was clean. She had gone to Mrs. Albright's and washed her face, brushed her hair. She was terrified. She told her story. She told them about finding him, about the storm, about the poster, about the fever, about him talking in his sleep, about the boy. She told them how he had refused to run, how he had stayed to protect her. Rigg's new lawyer, a drunk from the saloon, sneered. "And what did he offer you, girl? To tell these lies? Protection? Or was it just company in your cold, lonely tent?" The room snickered. Maeve felt the old, hot flush of shame. She looked down. Then she looked up. She looked at Eli. He had raised his head. He was watching her, his one good eye open, and it was full of not shame, not pity. It was just him, steady. Maeve turned to the judge. Her voice was quiet, but it did not shake. "He offered me nothing. He gave me something. I hid from the world. For years, I hid because of what men like Mr. Rigg did to me. I thought I was unclean. I thought I was nothing but a fallen girl in a dirty tent. I lived in shame. Every day." Her voice grew stronger. She was not just speaking to the judge. She was speaking to the town, to herself. "This man," Eli called her. "He was hunted. He was hurt. He was dying. And he treated me with respect. He saw me, not the fallen girl, just me. He stayed. He could have run, but he stayed to face this, because he would not leave me to face that man alone. He didn't just save that boy on the railroad. He saved me." Her words hung in the cold air. Jonas testified. Mrs. Albright testified. The judge was silent for a long time, looking at his hands. Finally, he looked up. "Mr. Rigg, your evidence is hearsay. Your wanted poster was issued by a railroad company, not a federal marshal, and your reputation," he glanced at Maeve, "has entered this courtroom. I am not satisfied. I am delaying this trial. I am taking the prisoner to Denver. He will be tried there, by a federal court, away from the influence of this town." It was a victory, a delay, a chance. Eli was not free, but he was not dead. Rigg exploded. "You can't! He's my bounty!" he was shouting, his hand moving toward his gun. "Restrain that man!" the judge roared. But the next morning, there was no one to restrain. Rigg was gone. His horse, his gear, his buffalo coat vanished in the night. He had run. He knew his lies, old and new, were unraveling. That evening, Maeve went to the stone hut. Eli was still inside, guarded now by 2 miners the judge had deputized. They let her go to the small, barred window. She carried a bundle, fresh water, bread, and clean strips of linen for bandages. She saw him. He was sitting on the cold floor, his back against the wall. He looked up as she approached. "Maeve," he whispered. His voice was broken. "I brought you bread," she said. Her hands were shaking as she passed the small loaf through the bars. Their fingers touched. You told them," he rasped, his voice thick with pain and awe. "In the church. You shamed yourself. For me." Maeve leaned her forehead against the cold, damp iron bars. She could smell the stone, and the blood, and him. "No," she whispered. "That's the thing. Eli, I didn't—" He was quiet, watching her in the dim light. "I'm not ashamed anymore." She reached her fingers through the bars. They could not touch his face. She could only brush the swollen, broken knuckles of his hand, which rested on the sill. He uncurled his fist, his fingers lacing with hers through the iron. Maeve closed her eyes and kissed his fingers. It was a promise. It was a vow. She would not hide again. Rigg was a creature of the dark. He had not fled to Denver. He had circled, like a wounded wolf, waiting for the pack to sleep. He had hidden in the high country timber, his rage and humiliation festering. He had lost his bounty. He had lost his reputation. He had been shamed by a girl he considered less than dirt. He had nothing left but a burning, black need for vengeance. The town of Last Hope slept uneasily. Judge Pace had declared he would transport Eli at first light. 2 miners, deputized and armed with rifles, sat on stools outside the stone hut. a small fire burning between them to ward off the biting cold. They were good men, but they were miners, not soldiers. They expected trouble from the front, from the town. They never thought to watch the church. Maeve was not in her tent. Mrs. Albright, in an act of quiet defiance, had insisted Maeve take a room at the boarding house. "It is not proper," she'd said, "for you to be alone." Maeve lay in a real bed, the sheets rough but clean. But she could not sleep. Her body ached, her lungs felt raw, and her heart was a tight, cold knot. From her small window, she had a clear view of the chapel, and just beyond it, the dark, squat shape of the stone hut. She watched the guards. She saw one of them pass a flask to the other. They were talking, their breath pluming in the air. They were cold. They were bored. Then she saw it, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. It was not a deer. It was a man, and he was big. He moved in a low crouch, using the back wall of the saloon, then the alley, then the deep darkness behind the chapel itself. He was carrying a heavy satchel. It was Rig. Maeve's heart stopped. He was not going for the guards. He was going for the back of the jail. The stone hut was built against the vestry of the chapel. They shared a thick common wall of fieldstone and mortar. She did not think. She did not grab a coat. She was out of her room and down the stairs in an instant, her stockinged feet silent on the wooden floors. She slipped out the back door of the boarding house, plunging into the ankle-deep, freezing snow. The air was so cold it felt like a slap. She moved into the alley, her eyes fixed on Rig. He was at the back of the chapel, at the corner where it met the jail. He knelt, placed his satchel on the snow, and took something out. A stick, then another. Dynamite. He was not just trying to kill Eli. He was going to bring the jail and the church down together. He was going to bury Eli, and his own shame in the same pile of rubble. He was going to erase the entire event. Rig. Her voice was a raw croak, but it cut through the night. He spun around. His face, in the faint starlight, was a mask of pure hatred. He had not expected her. "You!" he hissed. He looked like a cornered animal. "You just couldn't leave it be. Could you, girl?" "Don't do this!" Maeve pleaded, taking a step toward him. "It's over. The judge knows. Everyone knows. It's over when I say it's over," he snarled. He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out a match. "You come to save your lover? You can just die with him." He struck the match against the stone. Maeve did the only thing she could. She lunged. She was not trying to fight him. She was trying to grab the sticks of dynamite, to throw them, to do anything. She was small, and he was a bear. He met her lunge with a backhanded blow. His hand, heavy as iron, struck her across the face. The force of it was terrible. It snapped her head back, and she fell, her skull cracking hard against the frozen stone wall of the chapel. A sharp, white-hot pain exploded behind her eyes. The world spun. She opened her mouth and screamed. It was not a word. It was a sound of pure, animal terror, a sound ripped from the deepest part of her. Inside the stone hut, Eli was not asleep. He was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his entire body a symphony of pain. Every breath was a fresh agony in his ribs. But his mind was clear. He was listening to the muffled voices of the guards, to the wind. He was thinking of Maeve's face, her hand through the bars. Then he heard it, her scream. He knew it. He knew it as he knew his own name. It was the sound she had made in her sleep in the tent. It was the sound of her deepest fear. There was no thought. There was only fire. The adrenaline that surged through him was more powerful than any fever, stronger than any pain. He was on his feet. The door, it was heavy wood, barred from the outside. But he had been testing it. He had spent hours feeling the hinges, the frame. It was old. The wood around the latch was soft, rotten from a decade of meltwater and ice. He threw his body against it. Pain exploded in his wounded shoulder, but he did not feel it. The wood groaned. Outside, Riggs snarled, fumbling with another match. The first one had gone out. "Shut up!" He spat at Maeve's crumpled form. He struck the match. "Eli!" Maeve shrieked, consciousness returning in a wave of terror. She saw the match flare. Eli roared. He hit the door again, not with his shoulder, but with his good leg, a desperate mule kick. The rotten wood of the jamb splintered. The latch plate tore free. The door burst open. Eli exploded out of the darkness. He was a terrifying sight, a broken, bloody nightmare, his face swollen and purple, his one good eye blazing with a righteous fury. Rig looked up, his face a mask of disbelief. He had just lit the fuse. He had no time to move. Eli did not stop. He did not check his charge. He roared, a sound of pure, primal rage, and launched himself. He tackled Rig, his one good shoulder hitting the big man in the chest like a battering ram. The impact was brutal. It lifted Rig off his feet, slamming him backward, away from Maeve, away from the sputtering 6-inch fuse. The lit dynamite sat on the snow, its fuse hissing like a snake. "Eli, the fuse!" Maeve screamed, trying to crawl. But there was no time. The world ended. A white-hot flash, a sound that was not a sound, but a physical blow that punched the air from her lungs. The explosion was deafening. It tore through the night, a giant, angry fist. It was pressed against the stone wall, but it was also beneath the dry, wooden base of the chapel's steeple. The stone wall of the jail held, but the wooden bell tower, 100 years of dry tinder, erupted. It did not catch fire, it detonated. The steeple was ripped apart, climbing into the sky as a pillar of flame. Maeve was thrown back, her head hitting the ground. Eli and Rig, locked together, were lifted and thrown like rag dolls. They crashed into the far wall of the boarding house, a sickening crunch of timber and bone. Then, silence, a ringing, profound silence, followed by a new sound, the roar of fire. The entire chapel was ablaze. The town bell, torn from its mooring, crashed down through the burning roof, landing in the aisle with the sound of a cannon. Burning shingles, pieces of the steeple, rained down on the snow. "Eli," Maeve whimpered. Her ears were ringing. The world was blurry, orange and black. The town was screaming. Doors burst open. The two guards, thrown from their stools, were staggering, deafened. Maeve crawled. She pushed herself up, her body shaking. Rubble, fire, smoke. She saw Rig. He was half buried under a section of the steeple's crossbeam. He was not moving. His neck was at an angle that was wrong. She saw Eli. He was 10 feet away, a crumpled heap at the base of the wall. He was also still. "No." The word was a prayer. She crawled to him, her hands digging into the snow and ash. "No. You don't get to die. You don't get to leave." She reached him. His leg was twisted beneath him, clearly broken. A long, jagged piece of the burning steeple was embedded in his wounded shoulder. He was unconscious, his face pale beneath the blood and soot. But he was breathing. The heat was intense. The whole wall of the chapel was a sheet of flame. The side of the boarding house was starting to smoke. "Help!" Maeve screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar. She grabbed him. She hooked her arms under his, just as she had done at the riverbed. "You are a lot bigger than I thought," she gasped, the words choking on the smoke. "But you are not staying here." She pulled. He was dead weight. Her body was screaming. Her head felt like it was splitting open. But she pulled. She dragged him, inch by painful inch, through the snow, away from the burning rubble, away from the falling embers, back toward the center of the camp. The townspeople were there now, a crowd in nightshirts and long johns, their faces, illuminated by the fire, a mixture of terror and confusion. They were forming a useless bucket brigade. They saw her. They saw Maeve, the fallen girl, dragging the broken body of the killer from the inferno. "What?" "What happened?" Jonas stammered, holding a bucket. "It was Rig!" a man shouted. It was one of the guards. He was pointing, his hand shaking. He had dynamite. He tried to blow the jail. The cowboy. Calder. He broke out. He tackled Rig. He saved her. He saved all of us." The crowd was silent. They looked from the burning church to Rig's body. They looked at the dynamite sticks that had been thrown clear, unexploded. They looked at Maeve, kneeling over Eli, trying to staunch the bleeding from his shoulder with a piece of her own dress. Judge Pace was there, his face a grim mask in the firelight. He looked at the scene, his eyes taking in every detail. He saw the dynamite. He saw Rig. He saw the broken door of the jail. Then he looked at Sheriff Harlan, who was standing nearby, wringing his hands, staring at the fire. "Sheriff," Judge Pace said, his voice cold and loud, "you are a disgrace. You stood by while a good man was beaten. You took bribes. You let this animal operate under the color of law. You are removed from office. You are lucky I do not have you clapped in irons yourself." Harlan shrank back, his face white. The townspeople turned, their stares, once directed at Maeve, now falling on him with contempt. He was, in that moment, more of an outcast than she had ever been. "Men," the judge ordered, "see to Mr. Rig's body, and help this man. He is a hero." They carried Eli to the saloon. It was the only place left standing that was large enough. They laid him on a table, and the town doctor, drunk but competent, began to work. The next morning, the chapel was a smoking, blackened ruin. The air smelled of ash and loss. Judge Pace convened his court in the pick and shovel saloon. The whiskey bottles were cleared away, and he sat at a poker table, his law book open. Eli was there. He was on a cot in the corner, his legs splinted, his arm in a sling, his head bandaged. He was awake. His one good eye watched the proceedings. "In light of the events of last night," the judge declared, his voice echoing in the saloon, "and the confession of the minor Jonas, and the clear and present evidence of bribes, conspiracy, and attempted murder by the deceased, Mr. G. Rig, this court finds that there is no credible evidence against Mr. Eli Calder. There is no proof of wrongdoing. There is only hearsay, lies, and the word of a man who tried to murder him." He banged his hand on the table. "All charges against Eli Calder are hereby dismissed. He is a free man." A ragged cheer went up from the miners. Mrs. Albright, standing in the back, cried into a handkerchief. Maeve was standing by Eli's cot. She had been there all night, her face smudged with soot, her hair still wild. She had not left his side. As the cheer went up, she swayed. The world went gray at the edges. The adrenaline that had held her for 2 days, the lack of food, the blow to her head, and the thick, acrid smoke she had inhaled. It all hit her at once. Her lungs, raw and blistered, seized. She gasped, a dry rasping sound, and crumpled to the floor. She woke to softness. The light was pale, filtered through a clean cotton curtain. She was not in her tent. She was not on the saloon floor. She was in a bed, a real bed, with a thick quilt. She was in the best room at Mrs. Albright's. The air smelled of lavender, and a faint, sharp scent of carbolic. She turned her head. The movement was stiff. He was there. Eli was in a chair by her bed. He was a ruin of bandages and splints, his face still a map of purple and black bruises. But he was clean, he was shaved, and he was awake. He was holding her hand. He had been holding it, it seemed, for a long time. He saw her eyes open. A slow, painful smile spread across his battered face. "Maeve!" His voice was a low rasp. She tried to speak. Her throat was on fire. She licked her lips. The judge," she whispered, her voice a dry crackle. "He said, 'You're free.'" Eli nodded. His one good eye never left her face. He did. You could go now, she whispered. The words cost her. Go home, Oklahoma. You could be free. He was quiet for a long time, just looking at her, his gaze holding hers. He lifted her hand, the one he was holding. His knuckles were broken, his skin rough, but his touch was impossibly gentle. He brushed her hand against his scarred cheek. I could, he said, his voice thick. But I wouldn't be free. My home, it's not a place. Maeve, it's not Oklahoma. It burned down a long time ago. He leaned closer. The movement pained. He rested his bandaged forehead against her temple. She could feel the warmth of him, the steady, living truth of him. I'm not leaving, he whispered. Not without my home, not without you. Spring did not arrive in the high country. It had to be fought for, won from the snow. It came in a great, muddy rush, a torrent of meltwater that turned the camp's single street into a river of sludge. The snow receded, pulling back like a dirty blanket, revealing the bruised and frozen earth beneath. The scent of pine, sharp and clean, was replaced by the smell of damp earth, of rot, and of new, wet wood. The ruin of the chapel stood stark against the greening hills. It was a skeleton, a collection of blackened ribs pointing at the sky. The town bell, cracked and silent, lay half buried in the mud. A fallen idol. The townspeople gave the ruin a wide berth. It was a monument to their shame, to the night their civility had burned to the ground. Maeve Callahan was not afraid of it. She walked past it every morning on her way to the creek, her lungs still catching. A faint wheeze, a souvenir from the smoke. She was back in her tent. It was a habit, a shell she was not yet ready to shed, though its purpose was gone. The whispers had stopped. The miners, when they passed, tipped their hats. Mornin', ma'am, they'd say, their voices rough with a new, clumsy respect. The women, who had once looked through her, now nodded. A small, shared acknowledgement. Mrs. Albright brought her a fresh loaf of bread every Tuesday. Maeve was mending, but she was no longer mending for scraps. She was mending for coin. She was saving. Eli was mending, too. His leg had healed, but it had healed wrong. The bone had set, but the doctor, drunk as he was, had not set it straight. Eli now walked with a permanent, rolling limp, a constant reminder of the fall. His shoulder was a mass of scarred, tight muscle, his arm never to regain its full strength. He was no longer the cowboy who could break horses. The fire and the fall had taken that from him. He was not idle. He took the money the town had collected, a reward. Judge Pace had called it. For his part in stopping Rig, it was not $500, but it was enough. He did not buy a ticket to Oklahoma. He did not buy a new horse. He bought a piece of land. It was a patch of ground no one wanted. High up the slope, overlooking the camp from a distance. It was steep, rocky, but it had a stand of tall pines and a clear view of the sun. And it was his. Maeve watched him. Every day, he was up there. He had one good arm and one good leg. He dragged logs from the timberline, his body straining, his face set in a mask of grim determination. He dug stones from the earth, his hands, once deft with rope, now raw and bloody from the rock. He was building. She would bring him water at noon, and a piece of bread. He would stop, wipe the sweat from his face with his sleeve, and drink. He would not say much. Wood's good. He'd grunt, or stone solid. She would sit on a log and watch him work. It was a slow, agonizing process. He was fighting his own body, fighting the stubborn land. He was building a foundation, laying stones one by one, mixing mortar with mud and creek water. He was creating something permanent in a world that had proven to be anything but. This was their courtship. It was not in words. It was in the steady sound of his axe, the grunt of his labor, the quiet presence of her watching him. He was proving, day by day, that he was not the man in the fire. He was not running. He was building a home. It took a month. The cabin was small. Just one room, the pine logs rough-hewn. The gaps chinked with mud and moss. It was not pretty, but it was solid. It was anchored to the mountain. The day he finished the roof, he came down to her tent. He did not ask her to come see it. He just stood at the flap, his limp more pronounced from exhaustion. "I'm moving your things," he said. Maeve looked at him. She looked at her small, cold stove, her stool, her trunk of mending supplies. This tent had been her prison and her sanctuary. It had saved her. She had saved him here. "Eli?" she started, but she did not know what to say. He just nodded, as if she had agreed. He bent down, his bad legs stiff, and picked up her trunk. He hefted it onto his good shoulder. Grunting with the strain, he started walking. Maeve was left with a choice. Stay in the shadow of the camp, in the tent that defined her as the fallen girl, or follow him. She untied the flap. Letting it fall, she took her small kettle, her last possession, and she followed him up the hill. The cabin was warm. He had built a fire in the hearth, a wide, deep fireplace made of flat river stone. It was the heart of the home. The rest was simple, a bed frame he had built, a rough plank table, 2 stools. It was small, but it felt vast. The ceiling was high. A real window, covered in oiled parchment, let in the pale spring light. "It's solid," she whispered, echoing his own words. "Stone solid," he replied, setting her trunk down. He walked to the hearth. He pointed. Carved into the thick pine log that served as the mantelpiece, there was a shelf. It was a small, perfectly measured space, sanded smooth. "For this," he said. He took her sewing kit, the small, worn wooden box, and placed it on the shelf. It sat there, in the center of the home, over the fire. It was not a mender's tool. It was an artist's. It was a place of honor. Maeve touched the wood. She looked at the box, then at the fire, then at him. He was watching her, his face battered and bruised, his eyes anxious. She said nothing. She just went to him, stood on her toes, and kissed the sharp, scarred line of his jaw. They began to heal. Life in the cabin was quiet. They were 2 people who had been worn down to their essential parts. They did not have the energy for unnecessary words. They had seen the bottom of each other's souls. There were no secrets left to tell. Their new language was one of action. Maeve would wake first, her lungs rattling in the cold morning air. She would build the fire, her movements slow, her body still aching. She would put the kettle on, the one she had carried up the hill. When Eli rose, the coffee would be hot. He would go out, checking the snares he had set in the timber. His limp was heavy in the mornings, his shoulders stiff. He would come back with a rabbit, or nothing. It did not matter. He always came back. She would mend his coat, the same one she had patched in the tent. But now, she used real thread, her stitches small and neat. She was not just repairing, she was caring. At night, the silence was deep. The cabin was far from the noise of the saloon. They would eat, sitting at the table, the firelight painting their faces in orange and shadow. They were both still scarred. His face would never be unbruised. Her memory would never be clean. When the fire burned low, he would pull her close. It was not the desperate, frantic passion of the night before the mob. It was a quiet, necessary closeness. He would sit in the chair by the hearth, and she would sit on the floor, her back against his legs, his hand resting in her hair. Or they would lie in the bed, not speaking, her back pressed to his chest, his arm a solid, warm weight across her waist. He was an anchor. He kept her from drifting away in the night. He was her home. The town, too, was healing. The burned church was a constant, ugly reminder. They had to rebuild, and in that, they began to rebuild their community. "Mrs. Albright was the first. She came up the hill to the new cabin, breathing hard from the climb. She held out a bolt of fine blue calico. "My curtains," she said, her voice firm. "They were ruined by the smoke. I want new ones, and I will pay full price." Maeve looked at the fabric. It was beautiful. Yes, ma'am, I can do that." "I know you can, Mrs." Albright said. She looked around the small, clean cabin. She looked at the shelf where the sewing kit sat. "You've made a good home, Maeve, a solid home." After the curtains, others came. Miners needed new shirts, not just patches. Women wanted dresses hemmed. Maeve's work was in demand. Her hands were busy. Her coin jar began to fill. She and Eli were a part of the world, no longer just shadows at its edge. Then, one afternoon, a young woman came to the door. It was Sarah, the girl who was to marry Jonas, the miner who had spoken for Eli in the church. She was young, barely 18, and she was terrified. She twisted a piece of her apron in her hands. Miss Maeve," she stammered. "Come in, Sarah. Sit." Maeve gestured to a stool. I am to be married," Sarah said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Jonas, he's a good man. We want to be married. Preacher Davies is gone, but the judge, he's sending a new one." "That's wonderful news," Maeve said, her heart warming. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah took a deep breath. "The thing is, I was wondering, I've seen your sewing. It's the finest in the camp, finer than anything that comes on the wagons." She finally looked up, her eyes wide with a desperate, hopeful plea. I have this, my mother's, it's lace. I want a wedding dress, and I was hoping, would you make it for me?" Maeve's breath caught. A wedding dress. A symbol of purity, a symbol of joy, a symbol of a clean, hopeful beginning. Everything she had been told she was not, everything that had been stolen from her. Her hands, resting in her lap, began to tremble. She could feel the cold of the mission wagon. She could smell the whiskey on Silas's breath. She could feel the shame, hot and suffocating, the brand of the fallen girl. She, Maeve Callahan, to touch that sacred white lace? It was a sacrilege. I don't know, she whispered, her voice failing. "Please," Sarah said. "There's no one else I trust. You were the only one who was brave enough to tell the truth. I want to be married in a dress made by a brave woman, by an honest woman." An honest woman. Maeve looked at her hands. They were cracked, scarred by the awl, by the fire, by the fight, but they were clean. She had washed them in the creek that morning. She looked at her home, the solid stone hearth, the shelf where her sewing kit sat. She looked out the window. Eli was splitting wood, his movements slow and powerful, his limp a steady rhythm. He was her truth. "Yes," Maeve said, her voice quiet but steady. "I will make your dress, and it will be the most beautiful dress this camp has ever seen." She worked on it for a week. She worked with a focus she had never known. The lace was delicate. Her hands, so used to rough canvas and thick denim, had to learn to be gentle. One night, Eli found her sitting by the fire, the white fabric pooled in her lap, tears streaming down her face. She was not making a sound, just crying, her hands shaking so badly she could not hold the needle. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not ask about her past. He knew. He just sat on the floor beside her. He took her trembling hands in his own. He held them, his calloused, broken-knuckled hands enveloping hers, until the shaking stopped. He sat with her, in silence, for an hour, until she took a deep, shuddering breath, picked up the needle, and went back to work. The dress was finished. It was beautiful. It was a masterpiece of hope, stitched together by a woman who had finally reclaimed her own. That night, the work was done. Sarah had taken the dress, her face a beacon of pure joy. Maeve and Eli sat outside their cabin. The air was soft, the first true warmth of summer hinting on the breeze. The stars were out, a brilliant, cold scatter of diamonds. Eli was quiet, sitting on the step beside her. He had been quiet all day. He was working a piece of wood, his knife moving with a slow, careful precision. He had been carving it for weeks. "The stars are bright," Maeve said, just to hear his voice. "They are," he said. He slipped his knife back into its sheath. He was holding two small, circular objects in his palm. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice rough. He was nervous. She had seen him face a lynch mob, but he was nervous now. "I'm not a man with much. Maeve," he said, his eyes on the mountains. "The world, it took a lot from me. My pa's ranch, my brother, my good arm, my name, for a while." He turned to her. His battered face was serious in the starlight. "And it took a lot from you, I know that." He held out his hand. In his palm, white in the moonlight, were two rings. They were carved from the same pine as their cabin, the grain a warm, swirling pattern. They were not perfectly round. They were rough, whittled by his one good hand. I know it ain't gold," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And I know what that church, what that preacher, did to you. I know what men who talk of God did. I don't blame you for hating it." He took her hand. "But I need you to be my wife. I need to know, every day, that you're my home. We don't need a church. We don't need a preacher or a bell." He looked from the rings to her face, his one good eye searching hers. "We just need a fire, and you, and you saying yes." Maeve looked at the rings. She looked at his dear, broken face, and the tears came. Not the hot, angry tears of the church, not the silent, grieving tears over the lace. These were something else, a great, shuddering release, the last of the ice, melting. "Eli," she whispered, her voice cracking. I can't, I'm not whole, I'm broken. That man, Rig, he broke me. The girl who came on that wagon, she's gone." She was sobbing now, the last of her defenses, the last of her shame, pouring out. I'm not clean. I'm not what a wife should be." Eli did not shush her. He did not tell her she was wrong. He just waited until her sobs quieted to a tremor. He reached out his other hand, the one that was scarred and stiff, and touched her cheek. "Neither am I," he said, his voice soft, but clear as the starlight. "I'm not whole either." He touched his own face, the scar that ran from his eye to his jaw. He gestured to his bad leg. "I'm not the man I was. I'm broken. I'm scarred. I limp. I'm not the cowboy who rode in. He's gone too." He cupped her face, his gaze holding hers with a desperate, gentle truth. "But maybe we fit like this. Maybe two broken pieces. Maybe they make a new whole. I don't want the girl from the wagon. Maeve, I want you, the woman who faced down Rig, the woman who dragged me from a fire. I want you." She looked at him. She saw the truth. He was not offering to fix her. He was not offering to save her. He was offering to be broken with her. She did not say yes. She leaned in, her hands coming up to hold his face, her fingers tracing the scars she now knew as well as her own. She kissed him. It was not the desperate, fevered kiss from the tent. It was not the frantic, loving kiss from before the mob. It was a kiss of acceptance. It was a kiss of peace. It was a kiss that tasted of pine and smoke and tears. It was a promise. The wind howled down from the high peaks, a wild, lonely sound. But it was just the wind. It could not touch them. The world was still hard. The world would always be hard. But it was outside, inside the circle of their arms, in the small cabin built by love and survival. They began again. No shame, no running. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear from you. So please comment with where you are listening from to connect with fellow fans. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.